Well, first of all, let me welcome all of the interns and let me thank you all for what you are doing on behalf of the Council on International Relations, as well as for those of you who are working for our sister organization, Global Ties in Albuquerque. What you are doing is tremendously important to both of our organizations. I'm going to talk with you a little bit today about the International Visitor Leadership Program. I spent my entire professional career in the U.S. Foreign Service. I served in Latin America, in Europe, in Central Asia, and in Africa. And in a number of my posts, including in Romania, in Spain, and in Uzbekistan, I ran the IVLP programs. I have to say it was one of the most interesting and rewarding things that I did. I thought it would be useful for you to have a sense of what it is that we do overseas to choose International Visitor Leadership Program grantees. Embassies are very hierarchical. I think, as you all know, we have an ambassador, a deputy chief of mission, and then we have section heads. And they range from people in the political and economic section to the consular section. We have management people, and we have people who do public affairs. And that was what I did for most of my career. I was either a press attaché or a cultural affairs officer or a public affairs officer. That is the section that sets up the International Visitor Leadership Program overseas. And what a public affairs officer will do, or a cultural affairs officer will do, is he looks at what that embassy is doing in terms of its priorities. He talks with his colleagues, including the ambassador and all of the other section heads. And based on that, he puts together what is called the call for nominations. And those nominations, depending on the size of the post, you can be looking at anywhere from 3 or 4 nominees, which was how many we had when I was ambassador in Equatorial Guinea, or up to 60 when I ran the program in Spain. And so you put out the call, and then officers throughout an embassy make nominations based on what we are looking for. We may be looking for people in a country who are working in NGOs, promoting democracy, or in public administration, working on programs, outreach to other communities, to minorities, and government. We've done programs even with military officers sometimes, depending. So the range is tremendous. And so you get the nominations, and then there's a committee. And that committee within the embassy is made up usually with a chair. It's either the deputy chief of mission or the public affairs officer, and 4 or 5 representatives. And you look at all of those nominations, and you look at how strong they are in terms of the people that you would like to go to the United States. Now, let me say a couple things about that. The IVLP program looks for younger grantees. I have been in countries where our grantees have been as young as 20 years old and as old as 50. But generally, you are looking for people in the middle range. These are emerging professionals, as we call them sometimes, and these people are going to be on their way professionally with the idea that they will use this experience in the United States, will help them. Most of the people we choose have not been in the United States previously, or if they've been there, they've just been for a short visit. You don't want people who've been there for 4 or 5 years getting bachelor's or master's degrees. So we choose those people. We send that, what we call the slate of nominees, to Washington, to the part of the Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs that oversees the IVLP program, ECA. They look at it and they come back, and they usually will accept all of your grantees if you've done a good program. Then those go out to program agencies. It can be Meridian House. There are any number of them that do this. In the meantime, the embassy is sitting down with the grantees and congratulating them and getting a date for them to go to the United States. They'll be in the United States usually anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. Sometimes they will go as individual grantees. Sometimes they'll go as part of a group project within a country, or it can be a multi-country project. Some of them will have just a liaison if they have good English, or if it is a project where people are not fluent in English, they will have an interpreter or interpreters. The embassy officer who nominated the person for the grant then sits down and talks about what the person's interests are. Okay, you're interested in education. What areas of education? American Studies. Well, there are 4 or 5 really good universities in the United States. Harvard and Yale, Brown on the East Coast, University of Texas, University of Pennsylvania. You want to go to different kinds of universities to get a sense, talk about curriculum. If you're in government, we don't want you just to go to the big cities like Washington, New York, Los Angeles. We want you to go to smaller places like Santa Fe and Albuquerque because you're going to have more access. You're probably going to be able to see more people at the University of New Mexico, to be quite honest, or at Mexico State than Harvard or Yale because they don't get so many international visitors in a place like New Mexico. So here in New Mexico, we have an enormous amount to offer. So once all of that is done and all of the practical arrangements are made, the visitor then will head off either individually or in a group. He will have a program session in Washington. The State Department officer will be there. Someone from his program agency will be there as well. And this is the point when all of you interns come in, because after that orientation in Washington, that is when the person's going to visit 2 or 3 different cities. So they're going to come, let's say, to Santa Fe or Albuquerque. Now, you as interns, from a practical point of view, are going to have read all of the information about these grantees. You're going to, first of all, help your program head at either of the organizations set up all of the logistics, pick them up at the airport, have somebody there, get them to the hotel, make sure that you are aware if they have any dietary restrictions. So you're getting skills that are enormously important, that you can use in anything later in education, in business, if you go into government. But let me say something else. You're getting skills that go beyond that. You're using your interpersonal skills. And always remember that you may be the first person in Santa Fe or Albuquerque to meet that visitor. Maybe you go to the airport, maybe you're at the hotel. And so that role for you is to be welcoming, to make the person feel that he or she is going to have a really good program here, and that you in advance have worked very hard. You understand the person's needs. And the other part of what you're going to be doing also is setting up the appointments. You set something up in local government, you take them to the roundhouse. In education, maybe you go to St. John's College. You have a journalist, maybe you go to the Santa Fe New Mexican. So all of those things are things that you are going to wind up doing. And it's enormously important. And I would argue probably of anything that you do working either at CIR or at Global Ties, Albuquerque, working with these IBs is the most important. Now, I want to talk a little bit as well about the history of the International Visitor Leadership Program, because it's a very interesting one. Back in 1940, Nelson Rockefeller, whom some of you may have heard of, who later became governor of New York and then became vice president in the 1970s during the Ford administration, was asked by President Roosevelt to take a very important role. And he became the Commissioner for Commercial and Cultural Affairs within the U.S. Department of State. Now remember, this was 1940. There was a war raging in Europe. The Nazis were invading countries one by one. We had not entered yet, but we were very concerned by what the Nazis were doing. Now, one of the things that they were doing was trying to gain sympathy in the Southern Hemisphere, in our neighbors in Latin and South America. And they were using propaganda to say that their system, this strong authoritarian government, was the model that these countries should be following. President Roosevelt was very worried about this, and what he asked Nelson Rockefeller to do was to set up a program where we could bring journalists here from Latin America, and they would spend time not only in Washington as international visitors, but also, just like our program today, go to different places. The first group that came from throughout Latin America. There were 130 journalists, and they had the opportunity to interact with journalists here. They talked about the importance of free media, which one did not have in the fascist countries, including Germany and Italy. They talked about free speech. They talked about a society that listened to its people. And that program had a lot of impact. And so that program continued throughout the war. The war ended. And in the next administration, or actually it was the Eisenhower administration in the 1950s, President Eisenhower looked at that and said, what a great idea. That is a program we should be doing. And so in 1952, they created the International Visitor Program. And this program included people not only who were in journalism, but in all of these other fields, in education, in government, in business, and they started bringing people here. And this program was very successful. It was in 2004 that they changed the name of the program to the International Visitor Leadership Program. And that goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, that these grantees are young people that we hope will become leaders. This program has been enormously successful in terms of that goal of looking at leaders. We have had people who have come as International Visitor Leadership Program grantees in our history that have been able to look at the potential. We've had Indira Gandhi come, we have had people like Jacques Chirac, and these people have come as young people. And rather than coming as official people who were part of government, they've come in programs that have allowed them to meet people like you, young people who were working in this program. They've had a non-protocol experience, if you will. And they've sat around the kitchen table with people and talked about local politics. They've talked about what families are concerned about. They often bond with ordinary Americans here. And that bonding is what this program is about. It's a people-to-people program. And as these people move up in government, when they become leaders, they remember this experience in the United States. And that is enormously important for the future of our relationship with these countries. So what you were doing matters. What you're doing is enormously important. Let me talk a little bit about the number of grantees that we get here in New Mexico. Between our two organizations, we get anywhere from 450 to 500 people each year. And those programs are enormously important because as sponsors of these visitors, we generate income. And that is a major source allowing us to do all of the other activities, whether they're speaker programs or they're different luncheon events, receptions, galas. Having the income from this program is very, very important. In any given year, there are about 5,000 international visitors who come to the United States. How you should greet these visitors. Obviously, you're dealing with people from foreign cultures. And as I've said earlier, many of them are here for the very first time, and things are going to be strange to them. So I would recommend, as the most important thing that you do, cultural sensitivity. Realize that they're going to see things that they don't understand. They're going to ask you questions. And you need to be professional. You need to come across as listening to their concerns. They don't like the food in a restaurant. You can't immediately say, oh, well, we'll find something else. I mean, maybe you can. But you can look at perhaps the person who's a vegetarian. You can say, okay, fine, this restaurant can do something for you along these lines. If you feel there is improper behavior, if there are men in the group acting improperly towards women, that's a concern. You may be in a situation where you can raise that either with the liaison or with one of the interpreters. We are not trying to convert people to American values, but what we are trying to do is to impress on people that within our culture, certain behaviors are acceptable, that we do have certain norms, and that they are in our country as guests. And just as if we were in their country and there were certain norms, we would comply with those. So that is something that is very important that you need to think about as you work with these visitors. The last thing I will say to you, and I always said this every time I asked visitors what it was they wanted to do and prepared to go overseas, and I always said to them one thing, and I think it's important, I want to share with you. I always said to them, I know you're going to go to my country, and you're going to learn a lot of things about our society and institutions. But always remember, we learn as much from you as visitors as you will learn from us. In a way, you are ambassadors of your culture and of what you do. And so interact with Americans. Understand that we are interested in your country. We may not know a lot about your history or your culture, but that's what you can inform us on. So I'm going to wrap up with all of that, again, by thanking you, because we could not run this program, which the State Department does with all of the agencies and our local organizations like CIR, and also with Global Ties Albuquerque, without you. You're a key part to all of this. And I think at the end of your internship, you're going to leave and you're going to feel that you've learned a lot. So the very last thing I would say to you in closing is be good listeners. That quality is the most important thing, because if you're a good listener, you will take away so much. And I guarantee you, someday you'll be in another job, maybe you'll be overseas, and you'll remember this experience that you had with CIR and Global Ties. And you'll look back on it and say, boy, that was a good way to spend my summer or a semester or whatever. So anyway, congratulations, and I wish you all well.